Hi guys, I hope you're all doing well and welcome back to another episode on the Just Music Podcast. I'm super excited about this week because I got to sit down with Ryan Jones. Ryan Jones is a graduate from MSU and now he'll be working on his master's in musical composition. Ryan is a super cool guy, an educator, a pianist, a singer, a composer of choral and instrumental music, and this is one that you're not going to want to miss. Ryan now joins in progress. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Just Music Podcast. I'm super excited about this week. I have a friend, a musical colleague, somebody who teaches alongside me at the Roth Academy of Music. He is a pianist, a composer, a choral singer. He's just done it all. I'd like to welcome Ryan Jones onto the program. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm good, thanks. And thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I have been basically like hitting everybody in the academy that we both work at. And so it's been like just really, really cool to hear everybody's experiences. So anyway, welcome, Ryan. And I would like to have you kind of start off with like a little introduction of yourself, or a little origin story, where you grew up, kind of your, first kind of encounter with music and how your journey began.
Yeah, so I grew up in Canton, Michigan, which is in the Detroit area. And, I did all the early childhood classes and stuff. But right after that, I think my parents thought the logical next step would be to enroll me in like one of those group lessons for like 4-year-olds.
Uh-huh.
And I was easily the least interested piano student in the class. I was way more interested in like the coloring that the books had than like the music. So they pulled me out of that really quick. They figured that if I had an interest later on that then I could continue. But I had a cousin who played guitar. So like when I was 7, I really wanted to play guitar. And I never got very good at guitar because my teacher actually wound up being really knowledgeable about music theory. And that was way more interesting to me than learning how to play the guitar. So I think I spent like a year and a half on the Irish Washerwoman, but like we learned about like how to build all kinds of different chords and how scales work. Right. And that was really interesting to me. And like to learn that at such a young age, I feel like that really served me well to this day. And while that was happening, I was like teaching myself like how the notes I was learning matched up on the piano. So I was sort of putting myself through a piano book. And I joined school band, played trumpet, and that filled in a few gaps. But
nice.
I was kind of thinking that I wanted to be like a band director or some sort of music major one day. Mm-hmm. So I knew that it was probably time to get some lessons and be more serious. So I wanted to find a teacher who could, teach me theory, sort of like happened with the guitar lessons.
Right.
So we found this piano teacher who was like really intense, and that was great. But he said, you can learn theory, but you've got to play piano and practice like 2 hours a day.
Right.
Which was great because I don't think I would have had a primary instrument at college without that requirement from him. And I really fell in love with piano, and he was able to teach me some theory. Mm-hmm. and really help guide me in my composing and make me prepared to apply with a composition portfolio come senior year.
Wow. Yeah, that's really cool because I think like with a lot of like from an educational standpoint, I think when you start learning music at a young age, regardless of what instrument you may be playing or if you're a vocal major, I think you learn how to perform the craft, and then you kind of go back and start to learn the theory and start to analyze that. And that's definitely true of my whole journey, because I remember like when I was first starting to learn just like the basics, and then when I started like actually sitting down and like analyzing things in theory, I was like, well, I can play this, but I don't really know why it works or what the process is behind it. So that's interesting that you started basically kind of like the opposite of way that it kind of works nowadays. Is like, I mean, even like with our students, I always try to like, push a little bit of theory in here and say, okay, we're playing in the key of C, no sharps or flats. Oh, okay, we have an accidental here. What key are we, just kind of trying to throw those little tidbits in there just so they're kind of getting exposed to that, because, music theory can kind of be like, this daunting thing or overbearing if you're like, just getting exposed to it for the first time. So that's kind of cool. Now with your upbringing, did you come from like a musical family? Did your parents just kind of like nurture that, or did they play music themselves a little bit?
They were very supportive of it. My mom was she went to Aquinas College for a couple years, and I don't know if she was officially a piano major, but she was studying with the professor there and had a really bad experience and wound up switching to engineering. But she never like pushed that on me, or I've honestly not really heard her play very much. Okay. So I think it really did come from my own desire, but I mean, both my parents have an aptitude toward it. My dad's, we got him a bass for Christmas a few years
Oh.
ago, so he messes around with that occasionally. But
So you
yeah,
guys have like jam sessions?
oh, not even, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I think when we got it for him, I was like early in high school, and the idea was that I was going to try and teach him, and I think I was not very patient at all, and then he put it down. So
it's interesting because I think like when you're trying to teach like, or you're just trying to give a lesson to like a family member or just like, or somebody who's well respected, it's like the patience is not there as much as it is with like a young student who you've just met for the first time, where you're like, okay, yeah, like my patients are like, I'm fully there and I'm totally understanding that this is a beginner. But like if I was to teach my family, I would be like, all right, come on, let's go. Let's get it.
yeah.
Come on. So I totally understand that kind of point of view. So when you started being enrolled in these music classes and stuff like that, when you were a kid at a young age, did you have like any specific like musical influences that kind of like, you're like, oh, I kind of like that. Like, let's see what's going on here. Or I like the song that I heard. And, cause I know you said that you mentioned that, you're trying to learn how to play the guitar. Like, was there a moment where you heard something and you're like, oh, I want to learn that artist, or, musical influences in that nature?
um, maybe like I think what I was listening to most of all was like 60s and 70s rock,
Yeah.
like Beatles, the band, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really interested in like why the notes fit into the chords it did, and I think sometimes I was trying to overanalyze things because like like it's not a formula, like it's being creative within whatever like means you have or whatever system you're working within.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't think I had any huge influences, and I think that was a problem for me. Even going into college, was that like there was music that I really liked, music
Mm-hmm.
that I like to listen to, but it didn't always fit in with what I was wanting to create. So becoming more like literate about what I was interested in doing was I think a big step that happened in college. But yeah, before then I wouldn't say that I was guided too much else other than like figuring out how music worked.
Right. So your interest really lies in like, kind of like deconstructing a song and like listening to the melody and the chord progression, what's going on, which is cool. I think a lot of times, like with like when people start to study music, like, seriously, there's always like this whole idea where they're like, I don't really want to learn music theory necessarily because it's going to make me feel like I'm not feeling music the way that I would if I was just feeling things out. And it's like, yeah, I can understand that. But like when I analyze a piece of music and I'm looking through, what the composer did or what's being written or whatever, or if I see like a Neapolitan six in there, I'm like, oh, that's what they're doing. And I find that really interesting because it's just like you take this knowledge that you obtain and then you have a deeper appreciation for the piece that you may be working on or playing. I mean, that's the way that I view it, at least.
Yeah, no, totally. And I mean, like in my time as a music major, doing score study and delving into the pieces that I love was such an important part of my learning, as much as what my teachers taught me. But on the flip side, like I really think there is something to that where, like when you start out, like especially being creative, doing something like composing, what is like a limit that you have on yourself,
Yeah.
like you can work within that framework, and limits are really helpful when you're trying to create something, and when you're starting out, you don't have to self-impose those. But later on, when you're trying to be creative and you have all this knowledge, then you really have to be disciplined and say like, this is the piece that I'm writing, or this is what I'm exploring. I'm not doing all these things. And it's intimidating when you know that you could do all these things, or you have knowledge of all these things that are going on, and you've really got to pick one of them. Like like that short story where they like, or it's from oh man, what's that book? Have you heard of this book? It's about it's that like the motorcycle something. It's like a self-help like novel or something. All right, whatever the book is, there's a
how to music for dummies or something.
No, it's like all like, and oh man, it's like how to like maintain your motorcycle or like something. But it's like all an allegory. But like this guy's writing a he's asked to write a short story about a street. He can't do it. He's asked to write a short story about like the side of a building, and he can't even do that.
Oh.
But he's asked to write about, or maybe it's a she. Somebody is asked to write about then a brick, and like the words fly off the page, and they're writing even more than they could have at the start. So yeah, like having all these tools at your disposal, I think can be helpful, but it can be really harmful. If you're not disciplined about it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's a valuable takeaway. I think like when I first was starting to like get into like deeper theory, like your first like 2 semesters of theory or so, they're not all that deep. I mean, they are somewhat, but I mean, you're learning like, you know, some of its basic principles, like trying to understand like, you know, intervals and like how chords are built and thirds and things like that. And then once you start to get to your 3rd and 4th years, when you start to really, really dig deep into music, and you're just like, and your mind just kind of like hurts because you're just like, oh, okay, so you learn all these set foundational amount of rules, and they say, okay, this is the way that things have to be. And then when you start to study, you know, more impressionistic, expressionistic composers, you know, late romantic type stuff, then you're just like, okay, well, things are being really broken here. Like, you know, what's going on? And even modern music too. I remember like looking at like a Villalobos score, and I'm just like, okay, this is totally like, okay, what's going on here? Like, this should not work, right? But you know, so it's interesting. Okay, so this leads me into my question as far as like, I know that you are a classically trained classical pianist. So did you have like, when you first started your studies at MSU, was there like this choice that you had to make? Because I know like with MSU, it's like you're kind of in like the jazz realm of study, and you're kind of like in the classical realm of study. And I'm inexperienced because I've never been through MSU's program, but I know when I was looking at MSU, I since I'm a classical guitarist, I couldn't really go to MSU because they didn't really have a classical guitar program. So did you have to like make that choice that you were like, well, I want to study classical piano, or is that just kind of like the pursuit that you decided to choose? Or was that
for a composition major? I think that's sort of the default, that you'll study a classical instrument as your primary instrument.
okay?
And you can do a jazz instrument. I have a couple of friends who did that, but I think they may have actually been some of the first to do that. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's I think a little harder to arrange because the jazz program at MSU is amazing. So they are really highly selective, you know. But yeah, for me I think they was just assumed that I would be classical pianist.
Okay. Do you, I mean, like looking back on it, I love classical. I mean, I love jazz music. I love classical, but like when I sit down and I look at myself and I say, well, you know, this is the thing that really gets me excited to want to play the guitar. And like, I just love doing that. Is that kind of like similar thing for you? Like, you're like, yeah, I would rather compose or kind of, you know, play in this style than I would much more in that. I know it's hard to like make that, you know, choice, that distinction, because it's kind of like when you're deciding to study in an academic pursuit, that's kind of like the choices that we have to make. You know, are you in the jazz camp? Are you in the classical camp?
Yeah, I think I'm in the classical camp. Yeah, I know a little bit of like how jazz works, and I love to listen to it, but I definitely wouldn't be able to like jam with some jazz musicians and like really, you know, fit in.
Sure.
But I don't know if I really fit into either camp though, because like composers are, you know, reacting to what happened in classical music, like since 1900, when I think most people kind of stopped paying attention to it because other forms of popular music, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
And piano might be one of the most reactionary instruments, whereas like most things that were composed after 1900 are not things that you would like play on a piano jury, or that your teacher would even like work with you on, just because like they're not so knowledgeable about it as they are about that whole repertoire that came before that. So like composers are composing, you know, like music that's influenced by all the avant-garde things that happened in the 19th century, often at least in a university setting. And we're playing music, especially for like a pianist or a string player or something, that has, you know, not so much to do with it, other than that it was the antecedent to it. So.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, it's so interesting too nowadays, because like when I listen to, I should say classical with a little c. I'm generalizing here. Not specifically classical music. I'm talking classical, what we consider as art music. It's just so different, because like when you listen to that stuff now, and then I listen to like I listen to 90.5 a lot. So that's like our classical station here in East Lansing area, and then I flip to like a pop station or whatever, and I'm just like, man, like the intricacy and just like, and I'm not knocking pop music because I know pop music has its place for people, and I like certain pop music, don't get me wrong, but like I just like listen to the intricacy from like classical music to like pop music, and I'm just like day and night, like 1 4 5, 1 4 5. It's just over and over on like, you know, the pop stuff music, and that there's just more movement in that classical music, and I can just appreciate it more because it's just so much more richer, in my opinion. I know that's like a hard thing to say because people will like probably knock me and say, no, I disagree. But, you know, music is subjective in that sense. But that's why I've always kind of gravitated towards classical music, because I just think it's just so like, you know, the intricacy and all the work and stuff, it just really gets me excited. But I wanted to talk about some of your composing. So I know obviously you're a composition major. So I wanted you to kind of talk about your experiences in that. Like, I know like, you know, you obviously mentioned that you have like juries and stuff. So do you have to have a jury where you like perform a piece that you've composed, or do you have to like present it to like your faculty? Like, how does that work? I'm curious.
So my juries are actually just for the piano program. So I prepare a jury just
Okay.
like a performance major, and I
Okay.
think that the standards are a fair amount lower because they're expecting that you're sharing your time with your compositional activities. But
Mm-hmm.
and each year you're encouraged to submit a piece for a premieres concert, uh, which is, you know, like anyone in the department can submit to you, and you
Uh-huh.
find your own performers and
Oh, cool.
and get a premiere, and everyone in the department and hopefully some people outside to hear it. But you have a senior recital, which is a recital full of your own music, and you're also
Wow.
responsible for finding performers and stuff. But yeah, I mean, on a semester to semester basis, your evaluation is on your performance ability, beyond like what your composition teacher just says about your lessons and your progress and
Wow.
commitment and all that.
That's cool. So like when you have, okay, and I guess I'm kind of ignorant in this sense because I was a performance major, so I don't know anything about composing. I mean, I could say like, oh, I've written this song, but a chord progression, just playing a couple chords together is not, you know, in my opinion, like composing like this awesome work. So
But
like
yeah,
when, well, I mean, kind of, but I'm just saying like,
awesome. No, that's great.
I know, but like I just like when I see people that like, you know, like singer songwriters or like people who like, you know, modern composers today, like such as yourself. So like when you have like a lesson or something, do you sit down with like a composition teacher and they say, okay, the assignment is we're gonna have you compose in like this style or this idiom of composers, or like how does that work?
Yeah, they're like all kinds of different schools of thought. I think with like first few year undergrad composition students, they might be more ready to give assignments, or if you're falling into a rut, they'll say try and compose for this instrumentation, or like write a fast piece instead of like another
Mm-hmm.
slow piece, or like give you sort of like guidelines to structure. Or if you're really having a hard time writing and finding inspiration, maybe they'll create some limits for you to help you get started, whether or not you wind up following those through to the end. But what I found is that it was a combination of you bring in your music, have a conversation about the process,
Mm-hmm.
that you're going in, what you're wanting, maybe how your idea can be improved or more engaging. My teacher had, for my last 3 years of my undergrad, had a whole like list of things that you could talk about and think about, because like the obvious things to think about are melody and harmony,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe rhythm would be up there too. But what about dynamics? What about register? What about texture? What about instrumentation? You know,
Mm-hmm.
all these things are so fun, like fundamental to why we like the music that we like, but they're not necessarily in the forefront of our mind. And I've written pieces that are really, I think, uninteresting, like don't have melodies and are uninteresting harmonically, like, or maybe at least just static, you know. And but it's jumping around to different registers, or there's like sharp dynamic contrasts, or you know,
Mm-hmm.
like there are other ways to make a piece interesting. And I think hearing that from him helped me.
Mm-hmm.
And then usually at the end of the lesson, we would do, he would either recommend listening for me, or give me some score study to do, or something like that, so that um, like if I was writing for a particular instrument, I could see somebody who really knew how to write for that instrument,
Sure.
sort of
Yeah.
model how to do that. Or or if I was, you know, writing in a particular way, I could listen to somebody who was writing similar to that, or
Mm-hmm.
different from that, but something that might just give me, you know, some ideas moving forward.
Huh. So do you have like, this is so cool because like this is like a totally new experience for me because I've never even in the time where I had student friends around me that were also music majors, and none of them, they were all performance based, or they were going the history route of things. So like the composition just so new to me. So like, do you have a specific type of instrumentation that you gravitate towards, or you just like, you're like, oh, I really like, performing for a string trio, or excuse me, writing for string trio, or do you just kind of like cover the gamut in that sense?
I guess there are probably instruments that I prefer more than others, but I really like writing chamber or solo music, and I really like writing choral music. And I have written a large ensemble piece for orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my very favorite piece that I've written, and I think that's something that I just need to have more attempts at to really get a sense of. But what I really like about like solo or small chamber pieces is that you can write music for people that you know or for your friends, and it can be like a two-way street. Like throughout the process, you can meet with them and ask, hey, does this work for your instrument? Like, how does this feel? Or like give them a little fragment, ask them to improvise something based on that, or ask them to play like a piece that they really like to play for you. And it can really be like, you can get feedback from them, and then it's really a piece for them and their particular strengths, and not just like a piece for whatever instrument they play. And I think that that's so much more rewarding, because when you've got that other influence in there, you're going to write something different than if you're just holed up in a room trying to like write something for the whole time.
Yeah. I suppose it'd be way different if you're, composing something and writing something that's individualized and personalized for somebody that's important to you, opposed to just saying, well, I need to compose a piece for the sake of composing a piece,
Yeah, no, for sure. That's a whole different process. And that's what my orchestra piece felt like, because you're not gonna like meet with the string section and be like, hey, like, does this work, or does that feel comfortable? Like, you could find a violin player or something, but it's not the same as like, sharing that with somebody throughout the process.
Right. Man, that's cool. So this is an official invitation. I'll commission you to compose a guitar piece for me.
Yeah, I've never written for guitar. That would be cool. We would definitely have to work together really
Yeah,
close on that.
guitar is it's hard, because I know like for example, Michaela was on the Just Music podcast before, and when I first showed her my guitar music, like classical, like legit classical guitar music, she's like, why do you read all these ledger lines? Because guitar is only on treble clef. You don't read on a grand staff like you would on piano. And she's like, I just it's too much. Like, why is that? Like, can you put that in bass clef? And I'm like, this is not the way that it is. But yeah, it's interesting, because like I can't really think off the top of my head of many classical guitar composers. There's just composers for the guitar now for solo guitar music. I don't really know of any modern ones. I know that there's some that are still alive from like earliest 20th century kind of music, and then still alive into the 21st. But yeah, that'd be super cool. I would be interested in that.
Cool.
So in terms of like this whole virus and everything that we're dealing with, I know we were going to bring this up. It's a big subject matter today in the world. So how are you dealing with this in terms of like collaboration? I know you're saying like you can't necessarily go to like if you're composing for like strings or something, you can't go to those string players and say, hey, does this work, or is this too far of a stretch? So how do you kind of get around that kind of issue?
Yeah, it's been different not being able to not being able to like see people at all, but like especially see people for like musical reasons, because I mean, like in a very general sense, I think for most of us, music is a thing that we do together, and we're not allowed to do that right now.
Yeah.
So that's been challenging, but I'm writing a piece for saxophone and piano right now, and I've already met a few times with the saxophonist I'm writing for, who's one of my good friends, and we actually just Zoomed and talked a little about it a couple days ago. But I'm actually writing a set of clarinet miniatures right now, and my roommate plays clarinet, so I'm getting around that.
So he's like your guinea pig, like, here, you got to test this out. How does it sound? Yeah,
I think right after this call we might do some of that. But yeah, that's been nice to have another musician nearby. Otherwise, I think that would be really isolating.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely been challenging not being able to be like in the environment, even like at the Roth Academy or the other studio that I teach at, in these environments where people are excited about music, and that's just like a part of who they are, to not be surrounded by those environments, like you sort of like lose that energy that you have going into you that I didn't even realize that I had. I guess I kind of took that for granted, you know?
Yeah, man, I completely agree. I feel like this is the best thing about teaching. And like, I know it's just so interesting because I know we're both, I consider myself to be, a kid myself, fairly young, I don't consider myself to have the adult title yet. Even though I'm obtaining more adult responsibilities, but like when you're working with like these young kids at these academies and there's like that charisma and that excitement, like I just love it when I see it in the kids' eyes where they're excited to be there in the lesson. They say, I want to show you what I've worked on or whatever. And unfortunately, because of, social distancing and all that, I do take that for granted as well. And I miss my students because it's just, you don't get that same interaction and the same experience that you do through a video chat.
Yeah.
Humans, we long for that social connection and that, being in a close proximity to one another. So that does kind of suck. So I know what you mean when you say that. I've been struggling with that because it's like I miss my students. It's like it's just not the same experience. But
yeah,
hopefully, this goes by sooner than later. But it is cool that technology does allow us to be able to interact and still give lessons to students based on these platforms like Zoom. It is cool. I mean, you think about if this would have happened maybe 10 years ago or whatever. I mean, I guess there was like Skype and stuff, but the quality of that probably is not as good as it is now. I mean, there's still kind of flaws a little bit here with delay and stuff, but it's so much better than what it could be,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, that has run through my mind too. Like, I don't know what we would have done. Like, I guess we would have just not done it, but
yeah.
So
on a positive note,
yeah.
So is there any like, projects that you're working on now? I know you mentioned you're just working on like the miniatures for the clarinet, but like, are you doing, well, and also I want you to talk about like, is there a way that we can, do you have like links? Do you have like an area or a website that we can listen to some of your recordings? Cause I'd love to check out some of your work.
Yeah. My website's ryanhjones.com.
Link in the description.
Yeah. And I've got like a music page where you can click on any title and you can listen to it on SoundCloud, and you can follow along with the score. There's I've got a perusal score posted for each one. So.
Oh, cool. Wow.
Yeah.
So you can actually listen and like see what's going on too.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that it's hard to, and like one of the projects I'm thinking about trying to do, if they'll let me, not taking piano lessons in masters, in my masters, is to program a recital of like all living composers. And I've been looking at some living composers websites, and some are really good, some are bad. And without even seeing any of the score and like only having a recording, it's really hard to like click, I want to buy that piece of music to play it, because like, I don't know, like without knowing what's on the page, I feel like that's just like too big of a mystery. So if you want someone to play your music, like I feel like you've got to like, like give them an idea of what they'll be looking at and I think that'll help them assess like, am I able to play it? So
yeah,
I think that's super important.
No, I agree. I know sometimes like sometimes like if you can't find a free score, and a lot of times if you do find a free score somewhere, it's completely wrong, or it's someone's attempt at trying to replicate something. But yeah, I know it's probably just because they don't want people to steal the music for free. But I know it's like one of those situations where it's like you wanna be able to look at the entire score and check for accuracy. And I would imagine, especially like you being so interested in like choral music and stuff. And one composer that comes to mind as far as composing today is like Eric Whitaker, I believe it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did some of his music when I was at Olivet. But yeah, I know it's just too bad that you can't, kind of like, see it a little bit again and like test it for accuracy a little bit more. But that's, people probably steal the music, and that's probably an issue. But
yeah,
that's interesting, man. So I guess I didn't realize, like when I found out that you were a composing major, I didn't know that you had so much more emphasis on like choral music or vocal music, which is really cool. So I would imagine that kind of comes with like a whole new sense of there's obviously a certain amount of rules that you have to abide by a little more compared to instrumental music, because you have to make sure that all of the vocal parts fit in their desired register or range that they can sing in. So I would like you to talk a little bit about that, because that's interesting to me.
For sure, yeah. I mean, it's definitely a challenge because like the voice is I mean, it's kind of like an instrument in that each register sort of has its,
Hmm.
character and color and like ease of like performing at a certain volume
Hmm.
or any of that. But it's like especially if you're writing a cappella choral music,
Hmm.
like you've really got to support the singers. Like even in the choral conducting classes, like they emphasize that if you don't like really exaggerate that, like the singers might not even come in, and that like I think that's just because singing's such a personal thing that
Sure.
um
Yeah.
yeah I it it's I mean it's a different experience for sure, and maybe you can't like stretch your like aesthetics quite as much depending on who you're writing for, because so many choirs are like volunteers, are amateurs. But that's one
Right.
of the really cool things about it, because like these are people who are not professionals a lot of the time. There are professional choirs that are amazing,
Hmm.
but like the choirs that I've written for, at least some of them have been like amateur, like church choirs or like community
Sure.
choirs and stuff.
Hmm.
And that's so rewarding because they're so excited to have a piece of music that is for them.
Right.
And that is, and they're just excited to be making music at all. So
Right.
it's a really cool experience. And even if I'm not able to like stretch myself like aesthetically in the same way that I could if I was writing for like a music major friend who was um, like a saxophone player or something like
Hmm.
that, that's fine because it's really rewarding. And I love choral music. I love singing choral music, and I did get a chance to compose a piece for MSU's top choir, which was awesome because like I could push the envelope a little bit,
Right.
and that was a really cool experience. Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome, man. It's so cool that like to find out, and I'm obtaining more and little bits of information as I have more people on the podcast from MSU in different respects, as far as like, opera and then in the instrumental regard and composing as well. And so like when I hear all this thing, it's just so cool that like it's so student led that it's like, oh, I don't, it's not that I just get to compose this piece and I submit it PDF or whatever. Here it is. Here's the assignment. I did it, check it off. Let me grade it or whatever. But then like the fact that you get to actually, kind of showcase your work is, I mean, that's so cool. That's got to be such a rewarding experience to be able to, sit back and be like, yeah, you see that going on up there? I did that. I wrote that. That's awesome.
For sure, yeah, yeah, yeah. I've definitely been very lucky in my time at MSU.
So I know you just recently got accepted into your master's program. Congratulations, by the way, for that. So
Thanks.
you're going to obviously continue to study more composition, and then my question is like, once you're kind of done through those studies, what is your like your end goal? Like, if you could say, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Obviously, music, but is it, I just want to continue to compose pieces of music for instrumentations or orchestral or choral music all over where I can kind of showcase it. Is that like kind of your end goal?
Yeah, I guess I'm not 100% sure. I know I want to keep composing. I know I want to keep teaching one way or another. I guess my pipe dream would be to eventually get my doctorate and teach at the university level, but
Nice.
that's getting really hard to do because people are graduating each year with doctorates and fewer positions are opening up. So
Yeah.
like as as time progresses, it's gonna be like near impossible. It's already like near impossible to get one of those jobs. So and like a lot of the jobs that are opening up like are not tenure track or don't have benefits, or
Yeah.
like that might not even be a long term option. But it would be really cool to work toward that. But if not that, maybe sort of do what I'm doing right now in my gap year and have like income streams coming from a variety of different places. Like
Hmm.
hopefully people will still want to pay me to write music for them. Hopefully, hopefully I'll be able to like teach. I love teaching, young people, but I think it would also be a lot of fun to teach people who like are more sure that music is what they want to do, or are like really serious about it
Hmm.
one day. I think like the more experiences I accumulate, the more that'll be able to happen, and it would be really cool to be able to one way or another be an advocate for new music in the community, because like so many people are unaware of like music, like concert music, art music, classical music, whatever label that's being
Right.
written today, like let alone since the year like 1920 or something,
Right.
when it became like inaccessible or too avant-garde or whatever. And and it's music that you often have to meet halfway, but often it's really, really rewarding. And I think that if people were surrounded by like a community of people that really loved it, like that could be something that people could want to be part of. Or for the people that already love it, having, you know, events and performances that are really exciting to go to, I think is so important, because in areas that are not like Chicago and New York, there can be like a shortage of those.
Mm-hmm.
So in my master's degree, one of my goals, and like hopefully this comes to fruition, is to have some sort of concert series. And it's very rough stages right now, but hopefully MSU's entrepreneurship competition would at least in part be able to fund it. But like commission composers from all over, like student composers from all over Michigan.
Oh, okay.
And then there are a few ensembles who I know who might be willing to work with this project and are excited about performing new music, and do that at like non-traditional venues like a brewery or a coffee shop, and do that across the state, just so that like people who are excited about it can come to these events and like meet people they wouldn't have otherwise met, maybe people from other parts of the state, and then people who just think that sounds cool can come in and see what it's all about. But like maybe at some point doing things like that more regularly, and like maybe starting a nonprofit or a chamber ensemble, or just something to like have a presence in the community, like give a presence in the community to new music that is not overwhelmingly there, you know?
Right. So basically, you know, your whole outreach in that sense is like making modern music in terms of like, you know, classical little c more accessible to communities.
Yeah. For sure. Because like music being written today is so different from like classical music pre-1900, you know, like people are very few of them are writing in the style of like Beethoven or any of that, you know, like it's music written today, like for today. And we have this idea that classical music is stodgy, like, you know, you dress up in your fanciest clothes, you go and like you sit there really still and you don't clap between movements, and then like, you know, like you do your like golf clap, and then like you like, you know, obligatory like stand at the end of the performance, and it's like this whole ritual, right? And it's so divorced from how so many people choose to listen to music now today, and it's funded by like these wealthy donors primarily, right? Like that's where the funding comes from for these large ensembles. But for the most part, new music doesn't even have that. Like the patrons gravitate toward the like the older music. So like it's a whole different thing. It doesn't have to follow all these same performance rituals. I mean, neither does that music, but like it can be something that has a place in society for today, at least for the people who feel like they can enjoy it.
Right. You know, that's interesting, because I mean, now that you bring up a really good topic, because I think the last like the most closest composer that I have actually like seen works performed and that are closest to modern sense or living composers today was like Mendelssohn. And that's not, I mean, that's what, centuries ago, right? So I mean, like that's not even closely in any close proximity to modern composers. Not just because you're right, I don't think many places really have you know, they don't really do much of like nowadays works, or like if you hear their names, I mean, well, I guess the only exception to that I could think of is like maybe like film score. I mean, obviously you might hear like Hans Zimmer, or you might hear like John Williams in an orchestral sense or whatever, but it's like, oh yeah, because we're going to do a Star Wars theme night, or you know what I mean? Or we're going to do music from, I think Hans Zimmer did the music for like Indiana Jones. So we might do like an Indiana Jones music, you know? So it's just like, that's like the closest thing that you could consider to modern works, but it's like, you know, it's for a purpose. It's for a film. It's not music just for the fact of music, you know? For sure. Yeah, no, it's and like things like that, like movie music and pops music for like has a super important place, I think. And I think it draws people in that wouldn't otherwise be in. Right. Saying that, I'm realizing like the DSO is amazing at supporting the Detroit Symphony, amazing at supporting new music. I think most of their concerts do feature if not a living composer, a newer composer, which is awesome. But a lot of large, you know, institutions like that are just not set up that way. So yeah, it would be cool if that could, you know, be the case. But well, Ryan, I have just a couple more questions for you here. The one thing that I wanted to ask is, obviously with all of this time that we have, and then we kind of touch base a little bit on it. You kind of talked a little bit about the subject. But what do you think as far as like musicians now in this time? I know a lot of us are so reliant on, working in terms of like performing out or gigs or composing for this, for such as yourself. But what do you think the best approach is for all this extra time that we have now, that we can utilize our time the best as a musician? I mean, like for me, I'm like almost going back to like square one. Like, okay, let's work on technical chops, because like I'm also in this gap here right now where, I was a year off from undergrad, and then I'm going back to school in the fall for masters, but like all this time off, I don't really know what I should be focusing on. So do you have any like, kind of words of advice as far as like, what do you think we should be doing as far as utilizing our time in the most appropriate manner?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I feel like so many people have this urge to like do something or like make something, and like really cool things are coming out of it. Like, like this podcast started during this time, right?
Right.
And
Exactly.
it's so cool that like people like you and all that are like doing these, doing these things, or creating these like live stream concert series, or like these, like collaborations across. And I've definitely done it. Like I've been involved in a few things like that, but like there's this urge to like do stuff. And there've also been some awesome articles that I've read where they're encouraging people not to feel this obligation and stress to just do stuff because we have this time. So I think the trick is balancing it, because you have all this time, and we're used to, like, I think in our culture, when we're not doing stuff, we feel guilty, and that's like somehow we've like learned to do that.
Yeah.
And we can't reasonably be spending all this time doing stuff. So trying to, fend off that guilt and make sure we're taking care of ourselves, because it's really stressful to be, in the world right now.
Right.
And I think another thing that could be really important is like having fun making music, because when we're, professional musicians, student musicians, it's like what we do. It's our livelihood. It's our job. I think it's really easy to forget like how we started out and what drew us to it. So I've been trying to just, play some piano music that I like to play on my keyboard, and listen to some music that I like to listen to, and like composing this piece for my roommate. It's like no pressure, no deadline. I'm just writing a piece that I want to write, and I've really enjoyed doing those things. But I don't know. I think it's all balanced, because I think that we really do have to take advantage of this time too, and at least use it to get better, because it's horrible, but it is also an opportunity if you choose to look at it that way. Right.
Really, really respectable, kind of wise words there. I really appreciate that. So my last question is because I love asking when it pertains to individuals who I've interviewed as far as like being on the podcast, what is like your all-time favorite thing as far as like either a piece that you've composed, or like you sit back and like, if there was like a piece that you written or you saw played or performed or whatever, and you said, if I had to redo that piece, or if I had to make any changes about it, I wouldn't do it, because I'm like 100% satisfied with it. And that's a really hard thing to say to a musician, because we always want to change things, right? We're like, oh, well, I wish I would have done something differently here. I wish I did phrase that part differently, or whatever. Is there, and again, I'll have all the links in the description so you guys can check out Ryan's on his work on his website. But is there a piece that the audience should specifically check out when they look at your music and your compositions?
Oh man,
that's a hard question. I stumped him.
Well, I don't know if I have a piece that I would like change nothing on looking back, but I have a couple pieces that I'm like really happy with, that I would definitely place up near the top of my list of pieces. And one of them is a solo piano piece called 5 Pieces on 5 Notes. So they're all like little miniatures, and they each use like 5 letter name notes. It could be like, if it uses A as one of them, it could be like any A on the piano. But like it can only use 5 of them, and a lot of times they're not like things that belong to the same major scale or anything. So like that was a limit I put on myself, influenced by a piece by Ligeti that starts, it's 11 movements, starts with two notes or 2 pitch classes, and goes up to like every note of the chromatic scale in the 11th movement. And it's an amazing piece. So I kind of did my take on that, and I'm like, things that I was not expecting to happen happened. Like it just freed me up to think in such different ways. So
Okay.
I'm really happy with that piece. I learned a lot writing that piece. And I guess the other one would be a piece I wrote for a large, like 6-person mixed chamber ensemble and voice called A Touch of Cold. And it's sort of fueled by Imagist poetry, which is this very like concise, sort of detached like way of writing poetry that was a movement in the early 1900s. And so I tried to write like a few like without vocals Imagist poems for the ensemble with really limited means, and then some movements that set some text like that. I was really happy with how it came out, and I sort of allowed myself to stretch freer than I did before, because I knew the people who I was working with were pretty much up for whatever. So I felt like I could write whatever I wanted to write,
Sure.
rather than like they'd be uncomfortable if I wrote something too crazy. So it was a really great experience in that way. Yeah, so I guess those would be the two to check out. But I don't know that I would change nothing, but I definitely like feel proud listening back to those, you know.
Right. Well, that's awesome, man. I will definitely make sure to check those out. And again, I will have all of Ryan's links in the description. Well, Ryan, I really appreciate this. This was a lot of fun. I got to get to know you a little bit more as far as, you know, your academic pursuits and some of your, you know, composition in your works and that nature. So I'd like to thank you for being a guest on the Just Music podcast.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Ryan, I will see you hopefully real soon in person back at work.
Yeah, no kidding.
All right, man. Take care now. All right, guys, that was the video. I hope you really liked it. Make sure that you check the links down in the description to check out some of Ryan's original compositions. And also make sure that you look at the other videos down in the corner over there to look at all the other people that I've had on the Just Music podcast. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.